Question is to the Prime Minister, Philip Dunn.
Question number one, sir.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House will want to join me in extending our condolences to the families and friends of those who sadly lost their lives as a result of Storm Ciara and Storm Dennis. I know we would also like to thank all those who are providing support to tackle the impact of these storms, including the Environment Agency, local authorities, our emergency services and our armed forces. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Philip Dunn.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to associate myself with the thanks from the Prime Minister to all those helping in the aftermath of Storm Dennis. It's brought record high water levels. Record high water levels in the rivers Severn and Trent, and over 100 properties in my constituency have been flooded, bringing misery to those affected. The Severn in Bridgnorth, as we speak, has just breached its banks. Will the Prime Minister use his influence in the budget and later this year in the comprehensive spending review to increase infrastructure spending on flood defences for communities at risk, and as part of his determination in this year of COP26 to show global leadership taking action on climate change, adaptation and mitigation?
Indeed I can, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend. I can say that we have been ensuring that the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government is able to extend the Bellwin scheme where appropriate, and I can also tell my right honourable friends that, of course, we are investing massively in flood defences. £2.6 billion has already gone in, and as he knows, we are pledged to commit another £4 billion to defend this country against flooding.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My thoughts are with those suffering across the world from the coronavirus, and I want to send a message of praise to medical and emergency staff all over the world for what they're doing to try and stop the spread of this disease. And I hope that public health services in Britain will get the resources they need. And there is an urgent question on this after Prime Minister's question time today. Thousands of people across the country are also still struggling with the devastating impact of the floods. I want to pay tribute to the work of the Environment Agency, the Scottish and Welsh governments, council staff, fire service who are helping local residents, and the huge numbers of community volunteers who have pitched in to help their neighbours. Does the Prime Minister agree with the Conservative leader of Derbyshire County Council that he's turned his back on the people affected by the floods?
Mr. Speaker, since the flooding began, this government has been working flat out night and day to ensure that the people in this country get the support that they need, activating the Bellwin scheme, making sure that business gets the recovery relief that they need, the business rate relief, and, as I told the House just now, putting £2.6 billion now into flood defences and £4 billion more to come.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, you can't give local authorities the clear message you support them and then turn your back on them. Not my words. Conservative council leader said that. When I visited Pontypridd last week, I saw at first hand the damage and destruction that these floods have caused to people's lives, homes and businesses. But the Prime Minister was silent, sulking in his Grace and Favour mansion at Chevening. After 2 weeks of flooding, Mr. Speaker, there are now even memes being produced not asking where's Wally, saying where's Boris. When is the government going to stop hiding and show people that he actually cares, or is he too busy going about some other business? Maybe if he's too busy, he could send his chief adviser, Dominic Cummings. I'm sure he'd be very well received in all the flooded areas.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the response the government has mounted over the last few days, and we convened the National Flood Response Centre on the 14th, and since that event, since the flooding began, there has been a constant stream of ministerial activity led by my right honourable friends, the Secretary of State for the Environment, the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, and never forget that in spite of the flooding, and no one should underestimate the anguish that flooding causes, and of course it's an absolute shock to the households that are affected, but it is thanks to the measures that this government has put in that 200,000 households have been protected from flooding, and we don't hear that from the honourable member.
During the election campaign, I wrote to the Prime Minister demanding that Cobra be called to deal with the floods at that time. He very reluctantly agreed with that and eventually did call a meeting of Cobra. The situation now is even worse across the country than it was then. No Cobra has been called, or is he just pretending to care when he doesn't really care at all because there's no votes on the line at this moment?
Mr. Speaker, as he knows perfectly well, there has been a stream of ministerial meetings since the flooding began. The National Flood Response Centre was convened on February the 14th, and I have been directing things, as he perfectly knows. Cobra is a reference to Cabinet Office Briefing Room A. It is not the only room in which meetings can take place, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the issue is very serious for people around the country whose homes are being flooded. They need help and support. They don't need trite answers like that from their Prime Minister. Time and again, communities and lives are being put at risk, and the government simply refuses to acknowledge the scale of the problem. Does he agree with his honourable friend, the member for Shipley, who said the government has done precious little to stop the floods happening again?
Mr. Speaker, let me repeat for the benefit of the right honourable gentleman that this government has a fantastic record of investing in flood defences and will continue to do so. And the reason we can do so, the reason we've been able to commit £2.6 billion to flood defences and we're able to pledge another £4 billion, Mr. Speaker, is because this government is running a strong and successful and robust economy which he would ruin.
Jeremy Corbyn!
If that is the case, Mr. Speaker, why then is the government investing less than half of the amount of money the Environment Agency of England says is necessary to improve flood defences across the country? They say £5.6 billion is needed. So far as I'm aware, the government is investing less than half of that. Many areas in the households that I've visited, and you know what, I've learnt a lot from visiting victims of floods. The Prime Minister should try it one day. They told me they can't actually afford the insurance on their homes as the costs have skyrocketed. Recent studies have shown that 20,000 homes are not protected by the government's insurance scheme, are also not protected by flood defences. That's 20,000 homes with no insurance and in danger of being flooded imminently. Isn't it time the Prime Minister found a very urgent solution to this problem? Just imagine what it's like to live in a home that's in danger of being flooded, you can't get it insured, and if you own it, you can't sell it or can't move. You are totally stuck. They are looking for the government to help them out at their time of crisis.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he is perfectly right in the sense that there are particular problems to do with the insurance that I think anybody who's visited a flood-affected household will know. Flood Ray, on the other hand, has provided cover for over 164,000 households since 2018 and 2019. We are now looking, since last December's events, we are now looking at what we can do to protect households that do not have a proper insurance. But he also knows that there are measures in place to ensure that householders get £500 and £5,000 to compensate themselves from the worst damage that flooding can do. And that is cash that we can put in thanks to the investments that we have made in flood defences, which, believe me, would be beyond the capacities of any government led by a Corbyn, by a government led by the right honourable member.